Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our interview series on the show, in which we talk to fantastic people and really insightful people about giving us as much information as we can to understand the footballing world that little bit better. And I'm very, very happy to be joined today by David Webb, who's the former head of football operations at Huddersfield Town. How are you doing, David?
Very good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm very good. Apologies, we did go live a second ago, but we had a couple of technical difficulties, but it seems good now. Basically, the reason why I messaged you and got you onto the show is because obviously there's a lot of questions surrounding Arsenal and a lot of scrutiny goes on to our head of football at Raul Sanyehi. And I thought what would be a good idea is to give sort of the listeners an insight into what the role is about, what it does. But first off, before we even get to that, your career spans a very, very long time and you've covered multiple positions at different clubs. I kind of wanted to get some insight around how you got to the stage that you're at now and what roles you've previously encountered.
Yeah, it's been a sort of a long journey. I first started back in 2001, believe it or not, and it was the old Wimbledon, which is MK Dons now. I started off in the community as a coach, working in schools and development centres. Progressed up to academy at Crystal Palace, working with under 8s through to under 12s on a team basis. And I got into the recruitment side of things while I was coaching as well, back in 2003 to 5, and found some very interesting players. One that's done really well in Wilfried Zaha, and he progressed on. And then from there, I went to Tottenham as a coach and recruit coordinator, and did really well there. And then got the first sort of real sort of leadership management role at Millwall as a head of youth to 8 to 14s, and that combined sort of coaching and recruitment together. That was a really fascinating role. And then I did my academy manager's license at the time, because I just recently finished my license back in 2008. And you had to do a study abroad, and I went to Bayer Leverkusen as a study visit, and from that study visit developed a relationship that went on to some consulting work for a short period of time. And that was purely on recruitment for their, what they called elite talent between 15s and 21s. From there, went to Southampton as 15s to 21 sort of elite recruitment and scouting. So that took me across into Europe, all across the UK. And it was looking at elite players that Southampton were looking maybe to purchase from other clubs, and players that at the time, they had a fantastic record of bringing through top youth players just to complement what they already had. The first chance I got to work with Mauricio Pochettino, which was really fascinating, and he continued the good work and the trend that Southampton was already doing in bringing top young players through to the first team. From there, progressed to head of recruitment at Bournemouth, AFC Bournemouth in 2013, to work closely with Eddie Howe. And that was a really successful period for the club, because they had just come up from League One at the time. And during that 2-year period, we built a team, a culture and a philosophy that not only got out of the Championship, but done in style by winning the Championship in 2 years and doing it on a budget which was probably, I would say, probably about 12 out of the 22 teams that are in the Championship at the time. And from the players that are still there now, like Callum Wilson, Dan Gosling, Adam Smith, Junior Stanislas, Josh King. So we did it in a way where all the alignments and all the culture and the philosophies and the scouting and the way Eddie Howe worked, and it all aligned together, and we had good success from that. And that sort of brought me on to my next role at Tottenham to work again with Mauricio. And that was to go back to a role I did at Southampton, which was to work on 17s to first team elite players, and that would be all over the world. And that was to complement Mauricio's work on bringing through elite top talent through to the first team. So Tottenham is a bigger club than Southampton. They could attract bigger players, and Mauricio had a fantastic record of bringing through top talent. So my job was to source. I had a sort of big scouting department, analysis department, to source the world's best talent to bring through so he could work with. And from that work, combined with Paul Mitchell, was sort of director of recruitment as well, we managed to source players like Song, Dele Alli, Kieran Trippier, Toby Alderweireld, that all came through and have been really successful for Tottenham. After that, I took a little bit of time out and I did some consulting work for top European clubs, just on a consultancy basis, mainly for Germany, because I like the German market with Wolfsburg and Hoffenheim, and then found myself in Sweden as a technical director for Östersund, where Graham Potter previously was. So it was a good experience that in terms of learning a new culture, new experience, a new chance to learn different leagues, expand my knowledge, especially on the Scandinavian market as well. And first chance to be sort of, the next step in my career is that sort of technical director role. Had good success there. And then from that, led on to come to Huddersfield as head of football. Huddersfield took me out of my contract early at Östersund, sort of a compensation to start work and help them with the transition from being a club just relegated from the Premier League to help them adapt to life in the Championship and realign the goals and the strategy to help sort of bring the club back forward again.
It's a very sort of a wide range of roles for someone who's ended up in not necessarily a specific job now or formerly with Huddersfield, but where you started off with coaching and going into recruitment. That sort of transition, and you talk about the Wilfried Zaha thing in particular, and I want to pick up a couple of points that you brought up through that journey. Do you think at that early stage in your career, how much scrutiny is there and how much are you judged on sort of your wins and your losses of players that you do find?
Yeah, from I think what happened at Palace at the time was it was back in sort of those early sort of 2002, 2004 years. It was things you didn't really. It was Arsenal that was ahead of the trend in terms of looking at sort of the more athletic and physically defined players that would and sort of invest in them, sort of early seed invest in them young, and developing them as players and individuals. And when I looked at Crystal Palace again is a London club, had a real good catchment area, had an abundance of surrounding talent in the areas, all on the doorstep. So, and it wasn't really utilising that. And my understanding of the local area of South London and London itself, I thought, why I'm coaching, I wanted to contribute and help bring some sort of additional talent into the club. So it was bringing in players like Wilfried Zaha and sort of Sean Scannell, and you look at those players sort of really early in their infancy and their talent, so you don't know how really they're going to progress. But what they both had coming from, especially in an environment like Palace early, was they had core characteristics which helped them achieve where they needed to go. So Palace then becomes sort of a cauldron and environment for those sort of young, hungry sort of street players, if you like. And because it's not as big as maybe sort of Arsenal or Chelsea or even Tottenham to a degree, the talent that was coming through, they could really home and focus on. So fortunately enough for me, Wilfie was sort of one of the first of that crop, because they've produced a lot of players since then to come through. So that was a credit to Palace and its environment. And I think for me, sort of understanding recruitment, it was all about understanding the environments that you're bringing players into, whether they're a young player at 8, 9, 10 years of age, or an elite player sort of looking to make a transition, or fully fledged first team players. Or for me, it's always been about environment. So if you can understand the environments you're working in, whether it be an Arsenal, Palace, Huddersfield, Millwall, or a club abroad, you understand those environments, where the players are coming from and where you're bringing them to. You're never guaranteed, but it does, tip the odds slightly in your favour of that player being successful.
One of the things, and sort of moving on further in your career, the Southampton and Spurs situation, working with Pochettino, the role that you did, and sort of the marriage of Pochettino's abilities, as you said, to develop players and make them a very, very successful player. Do you think that because of how things work so well at Southampton, that enabled you to make that move to Spurs? Was there sort of a link between the two of you working well together meant that you got that move to North London?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it was having an understanding of sometimes when you join a new football club, it takes a little bit of time to get the culture of the the club, the environment, and to understand how it all worked, and the manager and the leadership structures, how they work. But I was fortunate enough to have him work with Poch at Southampton, to know what type of players that he needed to be recruited, and how he could set up a recruitment structure at Tottenham, which was similar to Southampton's in a way, but it was just obviously a step higher in the caliber of play he was looking at. So it was a real, when I went from making that transition from Bournemouth into Tottenham, I kind of knew, working with Poch previously, what I was going into. And when you're recruiting for someone like that, who's what I call like a coach developer or a teacher, I think you're always looking for players that Tottenham are in a competitive market that, just use the right word correctly, like broken a little bit or have potential to develop. So that enables that room for, even probably with your own manager now, Mikel Maurizio, they're probably similar. They like to develop people and coaches. So when you're recruiting players, you're looking for ones that have fantastic potential, a fantastic development curve to improve, but you're putting them in an environment where they can be developed further and coached and humanized a bit more. So I think if you understand that, then you're going to give yourself a lot more chance of success from the recruitment perspective.
We had a question come in from Mr. J in the chat. He says, how do you scout players in terms of not just ability and what they're like on the ball and what they do off the ball, but their mentality and their attitude? And we talked to Oliver Zeziger, who's a scout for a club out in Switzerland, and he works with Football Manager as well as a researcher there. And we asked him a very similar question. And he kind of talked about looking at what they're like in training, what their attitudes are towards other players. Is that sort of a similar thing to how you would judge a player mentality, or does it go beyond that as well?
Yeah, no, you'd incorporate some of those for sure. But for me, I would always go beyond that, because in my background, I was always interested. Footballers at the end of the day are people. So when you're looking at talent, you're also looking at the human aspect as well. So to answer the question, when you've got what you want from the football side in terms of the talent and the football criteria and the positional stuff of that they are good enough to be put forward from that perspective. At Bournemouth, we developed what we call like five key characteristics, which linked into the club, and that would be we had to use them as identifiable traits alongside the footballing ones. So for an Eddie Howe was big on the dressing room, so we looked at things like grit, determination, hard work. We looked to in their background through sort of their social media and through trusted sources. We would look through their previous playing history to give you an indication of where they've come from and where they've been educated from, and then you'd marry those together. You could never get 5 perfect ones because it's not out there. But if you had 2 or 3 really strong ones, and then 2 that you could develop because of the strength of the environment group you're bringing them into, that also helped your chances of that transition from that player where you purchased them from being successful.
It's really interesting getting that side of things, because recruitment, and I mean, people on social media love to think that they could be a scout for any club. I mean, I'm guilty of it at times. I definitely think that I can scout a few players across the world, but you never really look into the side of it, of their backgrounds, into so much detail. And it's such a key part to get that mentality right, to know that the dressing room is going to be the correct sort of, have that morale and that sort of experience as well, and the way that you deal with really tough situations. Moving then and sticking with the Spurs side of things, because one thing I'm really interested in is, because during the period that you were at Spurs and you talked about Son and Dele Alli, that was a period that on the other side of North London at Arsenal's recruitment was questionable in certain areas. Arsenal was spending a lot of money on players like Skodra Mustafi, who this season has definitely improved, but when he joined and sort of the most of his career has been questioned a lot. Did you at Spurs, and I don't know how to phrase this in the most professional way, but did you sort of look at Arsenal at all whilst there and think, what are they doing wrong, and what can we do to kind of supersede that and get above them as best we can?
Yeah, we never really looked at Arsenal as Arsenal are always going to be competitive to Tottenham in every sense of the arena because of the deep history of the two clubs. And Arsenal had always been, fantastic player recruit, especially under Wenger during the early phases, even from youth all the way through. So they was a good role model for a lot of clubs going forward on how they recruited. But I think sometimes what get lost, and not just Arsenal per se, at football clubs is like the alignment and the structures. And that would be the alignment, meaning that the head coach or manager through to the youth, through to the board, through to the CEO, and especially sort of a sporting director or head of recruitment. If those key figures within your football club are all aligned, you've got much more chance of success, because all of you understand what it is, what your objectives are, what type of player to recruit. Once you find that can be a little bit disjointed, it could be through any area, and it could be no one's fault in particular, then you find that sometimes decisions are made not cohesively. And when you find that, it becomes very difficult for the player to transition and settle well. Because, say for example, if I would imagine under Arsene Wenger that everything was Arsene Wenger type profile player, Steve Rowley and his recruitment team understood it really, really well. So you had plenty of successes, more than probably players that didn't do well. And I think with me understanding Poch, everyone understand the way Poch worked and the academy and everything becoming aligned, we knew that we couldn't compete financially, even with Arsenal, Man United, Man City, Chelsea, Liverpool, for example. But we had to make sure that what we did have was this collective, cohesive structure to give us the best chance of success. And I think with any sort of head coach or manager, that their recruitment strategies have got to be aligned with the way they work and the way the club wants to operate going forward. Otherwise, you do find sometimes it can get a little disjointed, and from that, bad decisions unfortunately could be made.
So if we then look ahead to the role that you most recently occupied as head of football operations, the head of football at Arsenal, around saying, he has gone under a lot of scrutiny. He's had to deal with a lot, in fairness. Obviously, the transition moving away from Arsene Wenger, moving into Unai Emery, and then, of course, now into Mikel Arteta. You had to deal with a situation of a change in management at Huddersfield. Talk me through that process, because most of your career is so focused on players, but coaches is looking at coaches and who you bring in as a new coach. How much does it differ, and how much obviously pressure is there on making that right decision?
Yeah, there's always it was quite a pressurized situation for myself personally, because I as I mentioned when we sort of at the start of the program, I was brought out of my contract from Östersund in Sweden to start early, and I was only in the role probably maybe 2 or 3 days when the owner made the call to sort of change managers in Jan Sievert, and he had been sort of under that German structure. He'd been sort of another product of the Borussia Dortmund sort of coaching academy and staff that come through there. So they wanted initially to find someone similar to David Wagner to follow on that process. It came at a very, very horrible time where Huddersfield were bottom of the Premier League and they hadn't won in ages, and it was difficult for him. So when they come into the Championship, the first 5-6 games they didn't win any games. So it needed a complete restructural change of maybe that German philosophy worked up until a point, but you have to understand the needs and the values of the club. Huddersfield's a working class club. It's a community based club. Its fans are, they want to see hard work. They want to see passion. They want to see commitment, grit, determination, all those things. So we wanted to give an opportunity to sort of up and coming managers. And when we sort of sourced, when we went through a whole process of what we wanted, and someone that could replicate a lot of those values I just mentioned. And then when we looked at sort of Danny Cowley, we liked that fact that he exhibited some of those qualities because he'd worked his way up from non-league. He had good FA Cup runs. He brought Lincoln from non-league to League One. He'd started at the very, very depths of sort of non-league. We worked all his way up, and he resonated a lot with the community aspect of the club, the fan engagement, sort of the wider parameters, not just the football inside. And we felt he had strong sort of characteristics that was needed to inject into the club at the time, because it was only they was one Huddersfield of were on a bit of a decline. They just was 1 point in the Championship, so we felt that new change of emphasis and someone that could also resonate with the values of the football club would help us drive forward. And so when you're profiling managers or coaches, it's the same as the way you're profiling players. You have to understand the needs and values of your football club and what it is that you're looking to represent, because you could get some fantastic coaches or managers that, their style and their working philosophy is completely different to what the club is. So to give your club the best chance of success, you want someone that, understands what it is that they're coming in to do, what their objectives are, and understanding what the club is about. And we felt that, with Danny and Nicky, they had those qualities at the time to do the job required, and that was to keep Huddersfield, to maintain their position into the Championship and help sort of transition some players in and out of the football club in January.
So you spent obviously a year at Huddersfield this year, and at the end of the season, for whatever reasons, you moved on. How do you look back at the year? Do you feel like it was a success by keeping Huddersfield up, or the fact that the club were in the Premier League last year, considering where the club finished, do you think that was too low of the expectations and possibly the reason why things changed at the end?
No, I think the agreement was, when I come in, was a 3-year plan. It wasn't to attack the Championship and invest heavily on sort of ready-made players that might give us a chance to get back up. It was a 3-year plan. So year one was to maintain Championship status. There wasn't no set position. Say we had to finish within the top 10 or top 6, for example. So that was one tick box achieved from that perspective. Yeah. To bring through homegrown players from the academy, and I think 3 made their debut, and another 4 sort of under the age of 19 was all given opportunities as well. So again, that was another one, because that gives you something to build upon for the future. Yeah. And reduce sort of the playing budget in January with some of the players that had different ambitions, not to be at Huddersfield, to be at other clubs, i.e. in the Premier League or Europe. So that was another tick box. We managed to reduce the budget down and bring players in that were more aligned with the club. And that was sort of permanent signings and up and coming sort of potential talent like Emile Smith-Rowe and one of your former players, Chris Willett. So that was kind of, from all those things I mentioned, I would say it was a season. The expectations of the season was all achieved, because there wasn't no expectations to get back up, to, despite the fans expect what they thought what the club should be doing, but they did it the right way, and financially making sure that over a longer period of time that the club is sustainable, rather than just because you've come back down to think you're going to shoot straight back up, because the Championship is absolutely brutal.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you look at the league, most of those teams have at some point been in the Premier League, and they've all got the same ambition to try and get up. I mean, my other half is a Charlton fan and unfortunately had the horrible instance on the final day of dealing with that situation. But it's just such a fine line, because you can have a good run at the start of the season, like Charlton did at the beginning of the season, and then all of a sudden you find yourselves in a relegation battle. So it's such an intense league, and arguably more competitive than the Premier League for sure. So it's I mean, credit to the people who do the jobs that you do. You mentioned Emile Smith-Rowe. That's kind of sort of the final part of the interview that I wanted to look at. He's obviously someone that I was surprised left Arsenal on loan, because when you look at, say, Joe Willock that's in the side, look at Reece Nelson, I look at those players and I think that from what Emile Smith-Rowe's already done at Arsenal, he's kind of on their level, in my opinion. So the fact that he left to get more game time, I still felt he could have done a little bit more at Arsenal this season, but he left. He went to Huddersfield. Talk me through the process of dealing with Arsenal and getting Emile Smith-Rowe on loan, and then ultimately how he ended up at the team.
Yeah. See, with Emile, I knew Emile really well as a player from my time at Tottenham, and from when he used to play against the academy teams, under 23 teams, and you could see from a young age that he was a special talent, and he started his sort of playing as sort of a wide player, and now he's escalated into sort of a number attacking number 8 and 10. So, and then what happened was because at Tottenham, we would have loved to try and sign him, but obviously we couldn't because he was contracted at Arsenal. But when my former colleague went to Red Bull Leipzig, Paul Mitchell, he took him on loan there because we already had a good understanding of Emil as a talent, and he got to know him personally as a player. So when we heard that during my time at Huddersfield that he could be potentially having conversations with Arsenal, that he could potentially be available for loan, we sort of started the process and we came to meet Arsenal, myself and the manager. We did a whole presentation of Huddersfield and how he'd fit in from the playing perspective, how we'd look after him from the human perspective, how we'd look after develop him as a player and as a person, and also get him as much game time as possible all the time he was, physically fit. So we put our case forward, but we wasn't the only club on the door. There was a host of other championship clubs. There was clubs from Germany because he had that experience of playing out there. But I think because of the relationship with Arsenal, because I kind of knew Arsenal a little bit from previous, and what we was guaranteeing for the player wasn't just all about football. It was what was an experience, and as talented as Emil is, and he is extremely talented as a football player. We felt that exposure and that championships, given where Huddersfield was, that would bring out another side into his sort of characteristics, because he'd be in a team that's fighting. So as much as we wanted to bring out his talent, we was also looking to bring out his character. And to be fair, we got that absolutely spot on, because he's been, he was fantastic for the club, and he showed probably other sides to his game that maybe sometimes that with young players you never really get to see it until they're exposed. And when you're in a dogfight in the championship, and it's physically a lot more demanding, because he's needed playing 2 games a week than the Premier League, then you really get to see someone show that grit and determination and that character combined with their football quality. And Emil, the story wrote itself on the last day of the season. He scored the winning goal, which probably kept Huddersfield in the league. So, from that perspective, he was, I think the big players step up at the best time. And he showed his, not only his footballing quality, but he showed his character in that game to keep calm and composed and finished, under that pressure for the club. So he's definitely a talent for Arsenal for the future, for sure. From a technical and from an intelligence and playing perspective, and from my opinion, he's already a Premier League player, and we was very fortunate. We was very, very fortunate to have him with us, for this loan period. And thank God he was with us, because he, like I said, he scored that winning goal that has probably kept Huddersfield up.
I've got kind of a follow-up question to that, because with the benefit of hindsight, you look at that loan as a massive success, scored such an important goal. But if we rewind back to January, when you were looking to bring him in, as a club like Huddersfield, you talked at the start of the season that one of the key objectives was to bring through young players that would be there for the future. Is there, the other side of that loan deal is obviously you've got a player that's only going to be there for 6 months, and he will occupy a position in the team which could have which basically is a block for those 6 months for someone else who could be playing. How does the club weigh up the pros and cons of taking a player on loan when you know that it's going to provide a more difficult route for some players to get playing time that season?
Yeah, and we was very clear in how we did that, because we had Lewis O'Brien that had been out on loan to Bradford the previous season, and he was more of a sort of, we call like a midfield box to box. And we had a couple of players that played in Emil's position that was exposed to sort of games against Charlton and had cameo appearances, but we felt they wasn't quite ready yet. So the process for them was to maybe go out and get some loan experience, or to bring in someone like Emil would help our young players during that small 6-month process, because obviously they're looking at, especially one of our young players, Matt Daly, who plays similar to Emil in terms of probably not, he's not Emil's level, but getting to train with him every day, getting to work with him and getting to see what sort of a top player at a top club looks like was a fantastic learning experience, and we wasn't overexposing our player that probably wasn't ready yet, then probably needed another 6 months to a year to get to Emil's kind of playing status. And we felt Emil would not only benefit from the first team, but also our younger players would look up to him as a role model, because it wasn't a path block, because it was only for a short period, but it would be a massive learning curve, and for them to sort of learn from him, ask him questions, develop, and just get to see that the standards he was setting in training every day. And I think that experience for our younger players was invaluable to them.
Final thing, because I wrote it down, and I'll kill myself if I don't ask the question. There's being inside the club, and then you looking as a fan from the outside. Media love to bring up stories of transfers and links between a host of players, no matter if there's any genuine connection there or if they've actually sort of heard a leak from inside the club. I'm really interested to know, from the perspective looking inside out, when you make contact with another club about your interest in players, I mean, using the Emil Smith-Rowe example, for instance, how quickly is it that you typically notice the press and the media can latch on to you making contact to another club and registering your interest in another player? How quickly do you see that process? And is it frustrating when you're trying to do negotiations with another club for a player like that?
Yeah, of course, because you try and be as confidential as you can, and you try and be professional as you can by going to Arsenal direct and, you know, asking about his availability and going through the process that Arsenal want to go through to line one of their top talents. Unfortunately, in the world we live in now, some way it always finds itself out into the media outlet in some capacity. And, you know, it does alert your competitors to, you know, it might not necessarily been thinking of Emil, but sometimes it's like a follow-on effect. They sort of say, well, if they're interested, then why aren't we looking? And it can bring on other clubs to your, you know, to make it harder that you necessarily weren't at the racing at the beginning. So it is frustrating, but also from the other side, you have to sort of cope with that. And you have to stay calm and focused and sort of remain positive on what your club can deliver, because at the end of the day, you know it's going to happen. You know, in some way, unless the transfer is done ultra quick, which usually they're not, because there's usually a process involved. You just have to understand that is part of the game, and he's going to get exposed. He's going to get out in the media, and some of it can be true, and some of it can be complete fabrication. But as long as you don't react either way, and you remain firm to what you're trying to achieve, then you just accept it as part of football and part of the industry.
Yeah, it is really interesting, because we're covering it from the outside in. We're doing videos on every single player that gets linked to the Arsenal, but looking that way, I can understand the frustration that must come when you're trying to do negotiation with a player. But genuinely, I've really enjoyed this chat with you, David. I think it's given a proper insight into what goes on in both recruitment and in the head of football role. So I genuinely really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having us on.
Awesome. If you have enjoyed the show, people, please make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe. You can follow David on Twitter at Webster1977. Just want to make sure I got that one right. And of course, you can follow us over on at the Gunner Talk TV. We'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.